Welcome back, Heart Warriors. Diane Kazer, your hostess here, and I've got an amazing guest today. He's pretty much got the summary of all of the things that we're talking about. And I'm actually going to read his bio because it's probably one of the most impressive Wikipedia bios I've ever seen. I met him actually at another speaker's event, his book signing. You guys may or may not have seen Pedram Shojai speak when I interviewed him. And that's where I met Reef, Dr. Reef, as he's known. He's a double board certified psychiatrist, addiction medicine physician, and relationship therapist, as well as a writer, host, and television personality. So you guys may have seen him in Dr. Oz or Dr. Phil or the Today Show, Chelsea Lately. He actually has done a lot of really cool interviews on CNN as a medical and psychiatric commentator. And the cool thing is that we're going to get into today is some of the experiences that he witnesses as the medical director of the Control Center in Beverly Hills. So he helps people come in that have chemical dependencies, behavioral addictions, mental health disorders, and relationship therapy. So we're going to bypass my relationship therapy talk today, and we're just going to go straight to yours because everybody wants to know what's in it for me, and everybody wants to know, I love picking Dr. Reef's brain on this, how can I be happier? Because we've got a lot of addiction stuff going on now today. So what's up, Dr. Reef? Thanks for being on here today.
No problem. Thanks for having me. That was a very nice bio setup that you did, that you read.
Well, yeah, that I read, and then I integrated into my own personal life, which is really what it's all about, right? Because there's all these words in Wikipedia. What?
Yeah, you integrated very well.
That's what I do, man. That's what I do. Why is it today that it's so hard for people to be happy or keep a balance of happy compared to all the other spectrum of emotions that we are humanly feeling on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think I'll start with a social commentary moment about where we are in society right now, and then I'll bring it back to my personal experience. But from our perspective right now, if you look at where people are much more overstimulated than they've ever been before. People are more lonely. If you look at some records compared to 10 years ago, we feel much, much busier than we were 10 years ago. But we're not busier than we were 10 years ago. Something's happening in our brains with this level of overstimulation and this desperate desire for validation and connection that we think we're getting online through social media and through other technological avenues, but we're really not. And as a species, we need to be bonded and connected to each other. It's actually pathologic for us not to be connected with each other. And when I say connected, I don't mean online connection. I mean true connections where we can read other people's, we can read their faces, we can see we can get a sense of what they're feeling. We can learn to emotionally express ourselves. We can learn to take our own internal feelings and be able to project them and share them with other people and have a response to their feelings. And we're not getting near as much of that as we have in the past. We're finding shortcuts. And with that shortcut, we're seeing a lot of media overload, which we think is just fine. We think, okay, well, it's just technology, it's no big deal. But it's not fine. We're having a response to that neurobiologically. And that neurobiological shift and change that we have here is causing us behaviorally to have a response. And that behavioral response is feeling overwhelmed much easier, giving up easier, not having the resiliency, not having the skill set, not having the coping skills to adapt to discomfort, to being able to handle uncomfortable situations or uncomfortable conversations. That's why we're seeing more and more people not being in relationships, having intimacy issues. People will say, well, these are really disparate things that how are they connected? They're connected by lack of connection. And personally, I've seen it coming more and more in the treatment center that I have in my private practice. I feel like I came into this field. I went to medical school. I did my residency in internal medicine. Did a psychiatry residency. An internship in internal medicine, a residency in psychiatry, and then I subspecialized in addiction medicine. I feel like I was trained as an academician to be the pathology expert. I was the expert on, you got a problem, let me diagnose you. You got a problem, let me give you some medication. You got a problem, let me do some brain testing and figure out through neuroimaging or through psychological testing or whatever what you have. And I'd see patient after patient after patient. We could give them the best meds, give them the best testing, give them the most accurate diagnosis, and give them cognitive behavioral tools, exactly what they needed. And they still wouldn't be happy. And they
Wow.
still wouldn't be fulfilled. They still wouldn't have a really good sense of who they are in the world. And that's when I realized there's so much more to it than just the baseline foundation of traditional medicine. There's the spiritual aspect of it, the connectivity aspect of it, the creative aspect of it, the resilience building, and more than anything else, the permission to allow yourself to have a life that is worthy and is fulfilled in a way that you want it to be. Because the majority of people walking around out there are not fulfilled, and they're not fulfilled because they don't even think they're capable of having a life that's fulfilled.
Capable, that I am not capable of having a life that's fulfilled. I can't personally ever imagine saying that. Where is this coming from? Where do people think, where are people being raised, society, to think that I'm not capable of fulfillment?
So when we're born, obviously we have genetics and we have genetic predisposition, but we don't have environmental stress at that point in time, unless it was a difficult delivery. So the baby comes out, baby's more pure. Baby then has connectivity in some way in communication with their primary caregivers. So we're looking at some attachment work, and you have either negative attachments, you can have very good attachments, you can have an attachment disorder, but you have some level of conditioning with your parents. You get your needs met, you don't get your needs met with your primary caregivers. You go through life and you slowly develop patterns, or what we call conditioning, on your behavior. You find that you can do certain things, and when you do those certain things, you get rewarded for them. Or you do other things and you get negative rewards for that, or you get scolded, or you get told off, or whatever it is that your parents do. And if you are ignored, if you have a controlling parent, if there was some kind of relationship you had with, it doesn't have to be a parent, it could be siblings, it could be being bullied, it could be trauma, it could be, there's so many different things. We know in neuroscience that we're conditioned and by experiences, and we have brain changes, primarily functional, but also structural, we're finding now, based on experiences. And those could be negative experiences, or they could be corrective experiences, which is what my whole business is about, is facilitating corrective experiences in people so that they can change, not only neurochemically, but they can change just behaviorally. So when people go through, they develop some level of conditioning. That conditioning, once they hit their adulthood, could be fear-based conditioning. It could be neglect conditioning. It could be dismissive conditioning. It could be I don't want to express vulnerability because I'm scared of being rejected conditioning. It could be all sorts of different things. And you develop a self-concept based on that conditioning. And that self-concept is, this is how I present myself in the world. And you would think that the majority of people out there are fulfilling what they want to do with their life. They're very capable, they give themselves permission, and they really go for it. The majority of people don't. The majority of people are living, they're either a little dissatisfied, or they're just kind of content getting by. But it's rare to find somebody that's like, you know what, I am doing exactly what I want to do. It doesn't have to be making a lot of money. It doesn't have to be having fame. It doesn't have to be anything that's glorified. It could just,
I can say that.
Yeah, well, you've got a bunch of unicorns in your room. You've got this great show. You seem very happy. It's great. But there's not that many people that feel that way. And this is one of the reasons. One is just not having the skill set, but the other is not having the self-concept. And when you look at motivational work, a lot of that is to build up the self-concept.
Okay. So remember one of my best friends I told you about, who got admitted to rehab in Los Angeles, the one I told you about a while ago. And I thought it was a really interesting topic their approach to finding out, to discovering more about herself and why she had addiction. And I'm sure this is exactly what you're doing in your rehab facility. And this is what I want to get to the viewers, is how to discover what, how, because my question I wrote down is, how do people learn their conditioning? The question that they asked my friend when she got admitted was, if you could describe your parents in 3 words, how would you describe them? And she said controlling, and then a couple other things too. But when she described her parents, she was then educated on what she was attracting into her life in terms of these males that perpetuated in these codependent relationships that caused her to use. So I thought that was really interesting, because if I could describe my parents, I would also then describe the people that I was attracting, but it also shifts based on where I'm at in my life and what I'm addressing from my past. So is this similar to what you would advise people to start doing so they can learn more, more self-awareness? I mean, self-awareness is number 1, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I came into this field focusing on pathology. And what I've learned in 2 decades, 20 years, whatever you want.
The D word, you said it.
Yeah, the D word.
We're still happy.
What I've learned is that, it's about minimizing the obstacles or the things that get in someone's way of their fulfillment, of their happiness, of doing what they're doing, and enhancing the things that will help them get closer towards fulfillment and happiness and doing what they're doing. That sounds very simple, but those limitations that you're working on could be mental health based, could be a behavioral addiction, a chemical addiction, could be an anger problem, could be an impulsivity problem, novelty seeking, stress, feeling overwhelmed, having some traumas, having whatever it is. Those are things that potentially are getting in the way of the clarity that you need, the good self-concept, the identity formation, the really understanding who you are. And in order to make changes in life, you have to know who you are at that moment in time prior to making the change. And a lot of us don't know who we are. We don't know what our identity is. Our identity was formed by our parents. Our identity was formed by the fact that you're a female, or you're come from this kind of family, or there's some status factor, or it's an externalized identity. Very rarely do we automatically go into it with an internalized identity of who we are, with a strong emotional backbone and a strong emotional foundation. So what we do at my treatment center, we've come a long way. I mean, I think as a treatment center, we've really grown. We started as a pathology treatment center. You have a diagnosis, you come here, we help you with your diagnosis. We give you the right amount of therapy, the right type of therapy. We work with families, we work with group therapy, we do individual work. Sometimes we do diagnostic scanning like brain imaging or neuropsychological testing, or whatever it is. And the whole focus was, let's improve your overall functioning by taking you out of the dysfunction that you're in. So let's say going from whatever that crisis is to a moment of stabilization, and then you're discharged. And that's the way traditional medicine works. We take away the pathology. But the reality is, the absence of pathology does not mean that you're healthy. The absence of sick does not mean that you're well. So my focus now with our treatment center, with my speaking, with my writing, with everything that I'm doing, is to move past stability, move past just overall content, move past, oh, well, I'm okay. And move into emotional growth, move into identity formation, move into the existential work that someone needs to find their sense of purpose. The happiest people in the world, to get back to happiness, are the people that have a purpose, and they know what their purpose is, and their purpose is very much aligned with who they are.
Yeah, that's what happened to me when I was I guess, to give you guys an example, knowing that everybody goes through this, I wasn't always this happy, and I'm not chronically happy either. I have my moments. I had a breakdown on Monday. It's part of being human, I suppose. And my aunt died of cancer. It's a big part of why I'm doing this summit. But when I was a pro soccer player, and I graduated from that when I was 23 and started my business as a financial planner, that was a massive identity shift. I went from this spotlight chick to owning my own business, then sold that, and then had a few years of what in the hell am I going to do now? And so I feel like we're constantly identity shifting. We're always seeking, who am I? And I love that quote. Maybe life isn't about becoming who you're supposed to be. Maybe it's about unbecoming what we've been taught to find out what we are supposed to be. And that's, to me, Dr. Reef, that's the magic of unicorns, is that it reminds me of the magic of who I was when I was 4 years old, when I was infatuated with them. And it tells me that I can be whoever I want. It doesn't tell me who I should be based on society, and doesn't define happiness outside of myself. It's inside of me. And so people may think it's childish, but to me, this is what reminds me who I am. So I have a question about what you just said, because I can hear people saying, well, if I'm in the same environment that created this identity, this lack of identity, this false identity, if I'm living in this same environment, how can I become who I am and who I really am and what my purpose is if I'm still in this environment that created the identity that I may not be?
Okay, first off, I'd like to say I knew at some point within the first 20 minutes of this, your unicorn reference would come into the conversation. So I thank you for that. And I agree with it. It's a symbol for you specifically. It's a symbol of play. It's a symbol of creativity. So I think it's great. So to answer the question, you can't stay automated in the same kind of environment that you're in that was either stifling or that was leading you in a certain direction if you don't feel content, if you don't feel fulfilled, if you don't feel happy. If you're stuck in a rut, and a lot of people will come to our center and they're stuck. They don't have a pathology per se. They don't have a diagnosis per se. They're just, I'm overwhelmed, I'm stuck. I'm kind of emotionally paralyzed, I'm numb. I'm not, things aren't awful, but I'm not enjoying life right now.
For them to be able to say that is awesome. Just to be vulnerable enough to say, I need help.
Yeah, and I think people are conditioned to say, I need help only when the bottom's falling out. They're super sick, they're super stressed, they're gonna have a nervous breakdown. No, you can get help at any moment in time. I mean, you and I could totally get help. I'm sure I could be way better than I am right now. But it's a matter of, what are you willing to do for yourself? And it's about self-care. So if you're in a situation where you're with the same kind of environment that has either kept you down or kept you in a certain place, well, you either need to get out of that environment or you take time out. You do a timeout, you hit the pause button, and you go to a workshop, or you go to a treatment center like ours, you go to a clinic, you go to a center that focuses on existential work and purpose. You talk to somebody like me. You shake the system up. You have to shake up the system. And by shaking up the system, you suddenly realize, you get perspective. You see that there's something else out there besides the environment that you're currently trapped in, like a rat in a maze. And you learn that, wow, there is another thing I can be doing right now. But a big part of that is to overcome the fear of change. So many of us are more familiar and comfortable with change, or with our current bad environment or neutral environment, than we are to take a risk and see what's out there. When I have some little nephews, and when I talk to my brother about my nephews, I'm like, have them experience as much as they possibly can. You want to expose them to as much as you possibly can. You don't want to have them live a repressed or controlled. Yeah, but some people are scared, and you don't want to impart that fear conditioning on your kids, because it gets passed from generation to generation to generation.
Yeah, the fear-based, and if you were to look at the news right now and to see the things that they're broadcasting worldwide, is it more fear-based or is it more positive-based?
Oh, it's all fear-based.
So the conditioning, and you guys might want to go back and listen to Dr. Ken Erickson talked a lot about this and how he raises his children. And I interviewed Ethan, future president of America, which is his 10-year-old son, who is basically launching this big thing on Kickstarter. So it is a big part how we're raising our children. So let's So let's just say, Dr. Reef, we've got this family, and we've got one of the spouses is really unhappy, and one of them comes in for treatment. What's happening if the spouse isn't supportive? And can that even cultivate change for the other person? I'm sure you see this a lot, where one person is on board, they really want to improve, they want to escalate, they want to ascend, they want to learn their purpose. Can this other spouse be the person that's holding them back from happiness? And I'm sure these people are afraid to change and shake the family up and leave the kids because they're not happy in the relationship. One's growing, one's not. What do we do there? How does that work?
So anytime we see someone who comes in, it's if you're married or if you have kids or if you're part of a tight family, when an individual comes in with a problem, it's not their problem. It's really everybody in that family. It has some significance, some component to this overall treatment. And if it's a spouse and one person is very open to change and to looking at life differently and to exposing themselves to something different, and the other person absolutely doesn't want, is either fearful or they're too busy or they just don't have the wherewithal to do it, it's a very tough place to be, because I've seen it happen. And all of us have seen relationships where one person grows and the other person doesn't. And when I say grows, I don't mean like they get taller. I mean like they emotionally grow. When one person emotionally grows and the other person doesn't, it's a bad prognosis for that relationship, because either it's going to be a relationship where somebody's needs aren't going to get met, but they stay in the relationship for whatever reason, or that relationship's not going to work. And in this case, it comes down to vulnerability. And it comes down to, we do something called motivational interviewing, but we don't just necessarily do it with the person who comes in for treatment. We might also do it with the spouse. I would have the spouse come in at least once, and I would say, listen, I just want to talk to you about this. And I get it from the person who's in for treatment. I'd have them say, listen, I've been making some major changes. I'm feeling a lot better about my life. I feel like I have more purpose now. I feel like I'm more well-defined. I feel like I have an emotional backbone. And for that reason, I'm talking to you and I'm bringing you in here that I need you to jump on board with me on this in some way. And then we find out where that other person's at. And if that other person is not willing to move at all, like not at all, then I work with the person individually and I'm like, look, I'm not saying you should be in the relationship or not be in the relationship, but you have to do what's good for you. And what's good for you, hopefully, will also be good for that other person if they really love you, and we can work with them to overcome their fear of whatever lack of change or lack of movement that they want. But every once in a while, there's someone who's so fixed in their ways, and they kind of like their family member or their spouse sick. Because let's be honest, there's some relationships where there's not sick per se, but there's somebody who's just completely giving of themselves to the point where it's negative for them, and the other spouse really likes it, and that spouse isn't going to change because they're getting what they want. And when the person finally speaks up for themselves, we got problems in that relationship.
I think we've talked about this before. I can't remember if it was at Disneyland or not, but that's what I hear the most, is that if there is change and that person loses their identity in the relationship, and then it's not only that they're changing their identity for themselves and as the center of their own universe, but now they're reflecting differently and taking on a different role in the relationship. And do I like that change? Do I not? It's like they may have just lost their purpose. And well, that may have been their biggest purpose if they were married for 10 years, and then all of a sudden the spouse is changing and now they have a different role and they're not needed as much, and maybe they like that codependence, and now there's other things coming up, like realizing that they're insecure and they need that sort of security from someone else. So I would imagine there's a lot of moving parts to it. So you just hit on something that I've never said this before publicly, but can you guess what my biggest fear is in relationships?
All sorts of things come to mind.
Okay, number one.
Why don't you tell me?
What we just talked about. It is, and I don't have a lot of fears, but I would say it's potentially just the apprehension that well, yeah, but I think the biggest part of it is I grow and they don't. And so I think trying to find someone who wants to grow and evolve and who's vulnerable and who's willing to say, yeah, I was wrong on that one. And I would say, oh yeah, I was wrong too. And we can fix this together. That we come together as two whole individuals. And I have a path and you have a path. And we come together when we want to walk the path together, but we're growing over here. And I see relationships that people grow apart. And some people just never grow. And the other person grows a lot faster than the other person. And there's this, where did we go? And that is losing yourself, I guess. But that's what I hear the number one, people who are still married. So, and that's the way I was raised, is that when you get married, you should be married for life. And and I don't necessarily know if I agree with that either now. Religion would say otherwise, but I think that that's the conditioning that people are still operating from, is that mom and dad said, and the religion, the church said, that if I get married and I stay with that one person forever, but then they're not happy. And then there's cheating happening. And so I get lost in all of that, because it's not necessarily what I would want for myself, but it's the way that we were raised. And so I'm trying to break my own conditioning of that. But I hear that in so many marriages when people confide in me and talk about, well, I'm sticking it out because I should, but I'm totally not happy. I'm not getting my needs met. I'm having sex twice a year with my wife. I don't get it.
Mm. A lot of people are fearful of change. That's it. And they're content with a circumstance that either they are comfortable with because that's how they were raised. And so they pick somebody that will keep them in that prison cell that's not really there, but they've kept themselves in, or that they're not strong enough in their character or their courage to get themselves out of it.
Could that possibly be their happiest place then, Dr. Reef, is being where they're at in this space of not change? Could that be their current life?
I don't think so. I think that every single one of us has a unique talent, a unique ability, a unique quality to share with the world that gives us a sense of purpose and gives us fulfillment. Whether you're male, you're female, you're black, you're white, you're brown, you're whatever you are. Everybody has some kind of purpose and some kind of ability that should be shared, should absolutely be shared. And if you're not sharing, you're not living. Locked up in this imaginary prison cell, whether it's in a relationship or it's in your mind, it's a problem, and it's something that you need to work out, and you need to figure out, and you need to cut the anchor, at least emotionally, of what it is that's causing you to not live a content and a fulfilled life.
So, Dr. Reef, take me through this. Somebody is currently listening to this. They're not happy in their lives. Where do they start?
Well, the first part of it is insight, which is a big piece of it, whether it's a mental health issue, addiction issue, or just a self-realization, self-help issue. You have to know you're not happy. I do a fair amount of speaking, and one of the questions I ask in some of the self-help talks I do is, raise your hand if you're happy. And then I go, happiness is not the absence of sadness. Happiness is a state of mind. And that state of mind is connected to you being aligned with your purpose, or you feeling like you're doing what you want to do in life, and you have some freedom to be able to do what you want to do. And initially, there's a bunch of people, because we're conditioned to not show vulnerability in public places, or some of us are. I was raised that way. So some people start like this, and then I define what it is, and their hands come down. And it's usually about 20% at most venues that I've been to. Sometimes it's 10%. Happy. Yeah, that are truly happy. And so then I ask the rest of the audience, why aren't you happy? And then I go, turn to the person next to you and tell them why you're not happy. And most people can't really say a whole lot. Occasionally they will. And I go, this is your first problem. The first part of this, if you're not happy and doing what you want to be doing in your life, is to figure out why. Forget what you're going to do about it. Let's just figure out, what is it? What's keeping you? What's holding you back? What's preventing you from doing what you want to do with your life? Because something's preventing you. I'm sure it's mental, but it's mental based on something. It's based on conditioning. It's based on your ex. It's based on your husband. There's going to be some external factor or factors that led to some kind of mental self-concept that you can't do what you want to do with your life. So start with that, develop the insight to know, you know what? I'm functioning at 35% of what I could be doing with my life. I'm not really happy. I'm just kind of hanging out. I'm getting by. And then that's the first step. And then the second step is being motivated to do something about it. And a lot of us don't know that we can do something until we go to a workshop or we go to a treatment center or go to a place like mine. You talk to somebody about it, and then you realize, wow, there is something I can do about it. And then you start learning some practical tools that get you towards going the direction that you want to go. And that's one of the main things we do at my treatment center. We do identity mapping, we do genograms, we do a lot of existential work, a lot of identity work, a lot of stress reduction work, working on self-limiting beliefs, working on changing cognitive processing, working on existential despair. All of that stuff is just as important, if not more, than treating sadness or treating some level of depression or anxiety or anger. Yeah, that stuff's really important, but those are the symptoms that have developed as a result of your existential distress.
Correct. So and expanding on what you just said, the self-sabotage, where does that begin? And do you walk people through the voices in my head when I say, I really want to do this, I want to plan this trip, I want to buy my air flight, just a one-way trip. Oh, but then, and my mind starts kicking in. Do we look at, okay, what year was I in when that trauma, how old was I when this trauma developed where I created this self-talk, self-sabotage business? Do you help people understand, and how do you walk them through what created their self-sabotage and how to rewrite that and shake it up like an Etch-a-Sketch and completely rewire the responses when they want to do something, when they feel inspired to do something and follow their dreams and discover the real them?
So as a psychiatrist or somebody who works in the human behavior field, one of the things that we always ask about, which is, it's joked around a lot on TV shows and wherever else, is tell me about your childhood. The goal of telling you about your childhood is so that we understand patterns. We understand attachment history. We understand how you became you today based on all that stuff that happened in the past. It's not to figure out that exact trauma at that exact moment at that exact time and try to erase it or rewrite it. It's to look at what brought you to who you are today and then to make changes now, real time, in the present, based on understanding your history and your conditioning. It's not to decondition you from 20 years ago. It's to change and alter your thinking and your ability and your permission to be happy real time. Now, there are therapists out there, and this isn't my opinion, but there are therapists out there that are going to spend 2 decades, 20 years, just focusing on what happened to you when you were 15. And they're going to talk about the trauma and the trauma and the trauma and the trauma and the trauma, and they're going to hyper-focus just on the trauma over and over and over again without building a really strong emotional foundation and emotional backbone and resilience skills and all of that. And I think they're missing the boat. I think the focus is, let's figure out how you got to be this way, and then let's enhance all these positive skills that are within you that you don't even know you have, and build these up based on the fact that we can overcome that negative stuff that happened before.
That's such a good point, because if we compliment the average woman today, and this just happened, my friend is a neurobiologist. I went to dinner with her last Friday, and I said, you look absolutely stunning. Your hair is gorgeous. Your face is just lit up. Your smile is bright. And she was like, ugh. Okay, so you basically received the flowers that I just handed to you and said, here, and you threw them across the restaurant. That's just basically what you did. And she started dying laughing and she turned bright red. But I think that's a good question to start with, is how do we receive compliments? So for someone who receives a compliment like that, Dr. Reef, and I hear people say this all the time. Well, if I receive a compliment, it means that I think I'm the shit, that I believe I'm this, that it would be an egotistical thing to receive a compliment when, wait a second, what's receiving it, your mind or your heart? Because that compliment, it just came from my heart, and I meant that, and I meant it as a gift to exchange and to bring it to your heart. So you basically just cut off love.
I think there's so many of us are afraid of stating something with conviction or of accepting something with conviction. In this case, for you, it's talking about the compliment. But think about how many vocal tics we have or negating language that we have. Somebody will be like, they'll make a major statement. I think the presidential candidates are a disaster. I don't know. I mean, it's just one of those things. You know what I mean?
Right.
So what we'll do is we'll take a major statement and then we'll add an I don't know at the end to lighten it. Or we'll add a, you know what I mean, to try to, hey, I'm looking for your approval. Give me your approval. Please give it to me.
Right.
Give it to me. Just to temper our statement, our powerful statement. And it works in reverse when you're receiving things too, because somebody might be like, I think you look really great today. Some people might say, wow, thanks. That's great. Other people might say, yeah, I don't really look that good, but yeah, okay. Or are you kidding me? Seriously? No, my hair's a mess right now. What are you talking about? We do that all the time. We temper, we quiet, we lessen, we minimize just honest statements that are connecting statements. That's connection juice between you and that woman. That's, hey, I'm giving you a compliment because I like you and I think highly of you. Oh, well, I don't want to receive that compliment because I don't know how I feel about myself. And that's kind of an intimate statement you're making to me. And I don't know if I want to be friendship intimate with you at this moment as much as you might want to with me. And I don't know what that means. Like it's just an honest form of communication and connection that you're presenting to somebody who wasn't willing at that moment to hear it.
Yeah. And then there's others that I've heard this too. And to my awareness anyway, I don't compliment to get back. In other words, there's people that compliment and they're fishing. They're like, they're feeling insecure. I don't feel like my butt looks very good in this dress. So I'm just going to give him a compliment and tell him he looks good because I want him to say something about my butt. I'm not that way. I'm pretty secure in myself. Every day is different, right? But I've heard people say that if I receive a compliment, it is a form of manipulation because I'm receiving it and therefore someone's trying to drive me to do something. And I would imagine that may have had something to do with their upbringing. Maybe they had a mom or someone who was manipulative or a dad that was manipulative or some kind of other attachment style that's causing that. So helping someone understand what their attachment style would then help them understand the way that they receive compliments, give compliments, receive love, give love. Yeah.
Yeah. They've been conditioned for secondary gain. And what is that secondary gain? What is the manipulation? What are they really driving at? I'm not driving at anything. I just think you look good. That's it.
Yeah.
And that, but listen, that could be a corrective experience for them. If they hear compliments that are authentic, that don't have secondary gain behind them, maybe that'll change. Their response to that might change.
Yeah. That's such a trip. I hear this in corporations too. And I want to hear your commentary on this, that people at work, they're afraid to show emotion because they're taught that showing emotion at work would mean that they're weak and they could potentially lose their job. So how can we in corporations find that balance where we can be ourselves and not lose our identity so much that we lose our paycheck?
Yeah, that's a hard one. I almost feel like there's like hard limits and there's kind of soft limits. And the hard limits are if you show too much emotion, you could be considered like a loose cannon at work. And that's hard because people won't want to trust if they feel like you might go off emotionally at some point in time, whether it's anger or it's gossip or it's sharing stories, you become unsafe. And if somebody's unsafe at work, nobody wants to deal with them. Now, true, authentic emotion that doesn't feel unstable or showing vulnerability is actually a strength. That's a great strength. I mean, if someone comes up to you at work and they ask how you're doing, and you're like, instead of saying, "Oh yeah, I'm great," like everyone would say, you say, "I'm a little nervous. I'm nervous about this project. We have that 2:00. We have that 2:00 meeting, and I know, we're supposed to act like we totally have it, but I'm a little nervous about what's going to happen at this thing." That person might connect with you and might say, "You know what? I'm kind of nervous too. Maybe we should go over it again. Or maybe we should work on it a little more. Or maybe together we can come up with some new ideas." Or something. And that never would have occurred had one person not been vulnerable to elicit vulnerability in the other person, and they bonded over the moment. We bond over vulnerability. It's one of our greatest ways to connect with each other.
Yes.
And I think you can do that in the workplace without appearing unsafe.
I totally agree. It could actually be a strategy. It could be something that actually builds to the bottom line profits and makes you more profitable and successful. And it's like, when I think about this, a lot of the work of Brene Brown, who I'm sure you know of, and I keep saying that vulnerability is the new six-pack. It's like, that's what's strong. In fact, I'm almost just so excited that I finally feel like I can be myself, because it's like the new trend to be yourself. So I get a lot of people, as you know, Dr. Reef, that I'm a nutritionist. I get a lot of people coming to me and they're saying, "I just can't break my dietary addictions. I'm eating like crap. I can't step away from the XYZ, whatever it is." And one of your free gifts today is that you're going to share that ebook on the addiction. People have various addictions, different things. So if someone came to you and said that, from your perspective, from your clinical perspective, I know what I would say as a nutritionist, and of course I dig in some of this stuff, but you would dig deeper. So how would you address that? Because I feel like food addiction is one of the bigger ones today. Yeah, of all the addictions.
Well, the book that I'm giving is on emotional. It's on the psychological aspects of eating. It's about emotional eating. It's not necessarily just for food addiction. It's for anyone that is wondering about their relationship with food, because emotional eating is not necessarily pathologic. It's what is your relationship with food? What is your association with food? And it could be something that ends up being a problem, or it could be something that you just need to watch. But I guarantee you, if you're utilizing food as a crutch, which you could also do with gambling, with sex, with relationships, with shopping, with a whole bunch of different things. But if you're utilizing food as a crutch, then it's replacing something else. It's replacing your ability to be vulnerable. It's replacing your ability to be intimate. It's replacing your ability to connect and your ability to communicate. It's replacing something. So I think it's really important, because it's a normative thing that we need to live in our lives, to eat, that we understand our relationship with food. So the gift, the offer, the book is essentially just a really good read to understand what your relationship is with food, what to do about it if it is problematic, and what things to look for. I think that there's people out there that end up passing a threshold of normative behavior of I don't just have an emotional connection with food. I have an emotional connection such that it's impaired a lot of my functioning in life. And I ended up having health consequences because of it, or there's some other problem. That I initially wrote the book when I was on the Dr. Oz show talking about gastric bypass and talking about food and how food is linked with other chemicals and neurotransmitters in the brain, and how addictive properties work and how food can be a part of those addictive properties. But then I wanted to write something that was more general for just a regular audience, not necessarily somebody that's addicted, but somebody that just is interested in their relationship with food. So that's where that came about.
Yeah. And there's other things. So you could probably take the tenets of that book and apply it to anything, right? So you've got my sex addiction is as a result of it's feeding something a fear. It's distracting me from a fear that I'm not addressing. Like, that could be money, that could be sex. So can we talk about each of those too?
Are you confessing, or are you? I didn't understand.
Yes. I am confessing that I have major money, sex, and food addiction.
Got it. Okay.
And a unicorn.
Well, you've got one thing in the book there. I can send you 2 others later.
Okay. What would you do with someone who has a unicorn?
Now that I believe that one officially. So, tell me. Sorry, we got stuck on unicorns and I lost the question. Actually, we were talking about sex addiction and I lost the question. So go ahead.
So that's it right there. Is that I feel like I love talking to you about dopamine. I hear an echo, so I hope on the other end people can hear this echo. But the dopamine. So dopamine is something that we are lacking a lot of today. And so it is then fulfilled by the transactional nature of sexual pleasure or food or money stimulation, some kind of a little hit. So let's talk about dopamine deficiency and using these addictions as a small hit to get what we're not getting as a result of something inside of ourselves being unaddressed.
Well, I don't necessarily think that we have this universal dopamine depletion syndrome. It's a very, very complex neurotransmitter soup that we have in our brains, where dopamine is indirectly related to the opiate receptor. There's a connection with norepinephrine and glutamate and serotonin and GABA, and it's a big soup of various connections and interconnectivity between the different neurotransmitters. So I don't necessarily think that there's this pure dopamine depletion syndrome. I think if you look at addictive properties, because we're looking at just general society in one way, and we can apply that with looking at the addiction community. In the addiction community, if you listen to Nora Vokow and you listen to people from the National Institute of Drug Abuse or the NIAAA or other organizations, they'll say that initially you get a dopamine rush between your ventral tegmentum, your nucleus accumbens, your prefrontal cortical area, your reward circuitry in your brain. And the initial part of it is the dopamine spike that we could say is bigger in an addict, or we could say is more long-lasting in an addict, or carries more significance in an addict. But it's not as much about that over time. It's about the associative learning processes around that area of the reward circuitry, the hippocampal area, prefrontal, the learning, the memory, the executive function changes, the associative properties of now desiring that drug, learning about that drug, remembering that drug, carrying a euphoric associative connection with that drug, that those brain changes in an addict are different than brain changes in a non-addict. So somebody that just does a line of Coke, who's a non-addict, just did a line of Coke. Maybe they felt good, maybe they felt okay, maybe they stayed up all night, and then the next day, okay. An addict with repeated exposure to that drug has now shifted a bunch of neuronal connections in their brain such that they're more hardwired from a neurobiological perspective to desire that drug more and more and more. So when you look at society, when you look at non-addicts, and you look at this overstimulated processing that we have with all the social media and all the technological advances and the constant, whoa, there's so much coming at me right now. There has got to be some type of neurobiological shift happening as well. Now, whether that's a dopamine depletion and we're craving more novelty and more dopamine, or it's some big chemical soup of, I don't want to be invisible. I personally think a lot of it is validation based. I don't necessarily think it's dopamine depletion based. I think it's, I feel invisible with all of this craziness going on right now. And I am going to do whatever I can because there's this confluence of reality television, the lure, social media, overstimulation, and underdeveloped emotional circuitry just based on our experiences that have put us in a position where so many people are like, wait, don't forget about me. Wait, me.
Totally.
The whole selfie response, feeling invisible, wanting to share your 15 minutes of fame on your Facebook wall, but yet that's not your real life. that's your best 15 minutes that you've put at representing your life. And if you look at some of the research, now some of it's conflicting, but I think more and more of that research in social media neuroscience is looking at there is a specific amount of social media, Facebook leading a cause, that if you use more than a certain amount, you're much more likely to have a psychological issue or psychological distress. And it's related to the amount of social media use that you have. So there is definitely a connection between social media use and psychopathology, or some level of psychological distress. And I think it's still too early to say, oh, well, if you have this, it means this. But there definitely is some element of Facebook blues or Facebook depression or anxiety related to overuse of social media. There's definitely something going on between our neuroscience and our current state of overstimulation, where our brains are changing and we're more vulnerable to psychological distress.
There's something that I read also. I mean, lately anyway, I've been craving, I interrupt my thoughts a lot. I start to go this way and I come back. I crave nature more than I've ever craved it. Like I just want to go outside and just be outside for an hour. It makes me wonder if, you know, we take all these studies, we take all this crazy science and all these crazy drugs, and we all just stepped outside for an hour a day and got a nice long hug from someone, which I know can improve brain science, and just decided to slow down. I feel like so much of this would improve. And I've even heard it said with studies that $75,000, have you heard this one? I'm not sure if I asked this before, but any money earned for a single individual above $75,000 doesn't bring us any more happiness than just making less than $75,000. What would you say about that?
Well, I look at some of the data on AAA AARP. If you look at the they interviewed some people that were seniors that were at nursing homes that were, you know, at the kind of the end stages of their life, and they said, what would you do differently? What do you regret? Where are you at with stuff? And they all said pretty much the same thing. I spent way too much time working. Now, whatever money I have, it's for my medical bills, or it's for really, I just spent decades of my life on this automated circuit of working. I didn't appreciate my spouse. I didn't appreciate my kids as much. I didn't take time to do novel things. I didn't connect with people more. And the biggest one was I didn't do what I wanted to do with my life. I have regrets because there were certain things I wanted to do, and I felt like it was too busy to do. I was too busy doing my job, or what I felt was pressured. Society was pressuring me to do. And I was, you know, people call it the rat race, but I was in the rat race so much so that I couldn't see clearly. And now here I am, and I'm in a nursing home, and, you know, I don't have a lot of time left, and I can't really do much anymore. And I can't do any of these things that I've been talking about, but I have this deep regret that I didn't do it. And that's what people say when they're looking at it from the other side. And you and me and the people listening, we can do something about that. We can go after the things that we want to do before we end up in a nursing home talking about it as it's in the past. And you know, I hope your viewers maybe take a piece of that or listen to that and maybe do something about it.
Yeah, let's end on that note, Dr. Reef. So I already hear the excuses because I work with people one-on-one with food and beyond, of course. And I hear the excuses that I don't have time. I mean, I've got to work 8 hours a day, and I've got an hour commute, so that's 10 hours. And I've got to come home, take care of my kids. I got to feed them. I got to get them ready for bed. I got to bathe them. Like, I have to make enough money to afford my lifestyle, my kids' lifestyle, my spouse's bills, or let's just say alimony or whatever it is, child support. So I don't have time to do these things that a senior citizen that has all day long to ponder what they didn't do. I don't have the time to plan those things. So how do we build a life where, I hear people always say this too, it's selfish to think of myself. It's selfish to do self-care because I've got to think of my kids first. I've got to think about my family first. So how do we find the balance? How does one just here we'll get to the end, the top 3 things that you would recommend where we can start to find a balance so we're at least moving in a positive direction.
Well, I don't think there's a top 3, but I'll just mention 3 off the top of my head. I would say the first is understanding that self-care is an emotional thing. People think of self-care as, oh, I gotta make sure I don't get diabetes. Oh, I gotta work out a little more. Oh, I don't wanna look fat. It's a vanity thing for some people. It's all about vanity. And it's so much more than vanity. It's self-care allows you to be able to not be automated, whether it's for 15 minutes when you meditate or if it's for an hour in the morning, or you wake up an hour early or a half hour early so that you can just dedicate it to self-care. Maybe you take a run and you clear your head. Maybe you just meditate. Maybe you sit on your rooftop and just think. Maybe you just not think and you just sit up there and you let things just happen naturally and just enjoy nature. There's something that you're doing to pull yourself out of the rat race and pull yourself out of that automated state that a lot of us enter. And by pulling yourself out, even for a half hour a day or an hour a day, you're able to think with a little more clarity. You're not stuck. You can actually say, you know what? I need a vacation. Or you know what? I need a different job. Or you know what? I need a different career. Or you know what? I don't spend any time with my kids. I need to start spending a little more time with them. Or you know what? Those you know whats keep coming up. And you start realizing that, wow, I have the power to change my life for the better. But you'll never do that unless you take some time out to have self-care. And when I think of self-care, I think of it emotionally. I don't think of it physically. So that's the first thing. The second is connection. Without connection, we don't have anything. You can't live the life as a Unabomber and hide out in some cabin somewhere and think that you're going to have a healthy emotional life. You're not. And it's incredibly important that we allow ourselves to not have electronic connections, but to have real life connections, because it's good for our health, it's good for our brains, it's good for our sanity, and it's good for our happiness. And the third is that the absence, as I mentioned, the absence of sickness does not mean you're healthy. I think it's really important that people have the insight to know that you can give yourself permission to do the things that you want to do with your life, or to achieve some level of fulfillment, or achieve the purpose that you've been looking for, or the happiness that you've been looking for. But you have to allow yourself to be courageous enough to change things that you're familiar with, to change things where it's going to feel really rocky at first, and it's going to feel really, really scary before it gets better. But that change is an incredibly important part of being an evolved person and being a happy person.
I love that last one, the courage to change. And this is why I love the formula that I implement myself, is to do one thing a day that scares you. And the more you exercise that muscle, the stronger it can become. Because maybe one day the big change might be that you leave your job, or that you leave your spouse, or that you leave the country. So I think little exercises of change, and that could be your perspective of, or your perception of what self-care means, is just shifting that to, gosh, if I can take better care of myself in this temple, I can show up for more people in this world. So if somebody wants to get a hold of you, do you do private counseling? Because you've been referring to your practice a lot today. So we've got the free gift. They're going to go over and read that. But I would imagine, I mean, I want help from you right now because you're so good at communicating all of this. So if someone wanted to reach out to you, how could they?
So my focus has been on the treatment center. So the treatment center is the main place because we've trained everybody at my center based on the philosophy that I've just been discussing with you now. So we have really great psychologists and medical doctors and therapists and executive coaches and existential experts and identity experts that are there. It's called the Beverly Hills Center for Self-Control and Lifestyle Management. The short name for it is the Control Center, for people that are either out of control or they're to control, and they want to break out of that controlled spell that they're in. The email that people can reach me at is Reef at drreef.com. It's DOCTORREEF.com. The website for the treatment center is thecontrolcenter.com, thecontrolcenter.com. And I've been doing a lot of speaking, and the speaking gigs will be up on my website at drreef.com, doctor spelled out. And I have an online talk show that's called Reef Madness. And so if you YouTube Reef Madness or you go to reefmadnessshow.com, you can see it. And it's been going great. And it's something I'm very proud of. It's what you talked about news, and we get our news and it's so fear-based and it's so based. And a lot more people are, especially younger people, are getting their news from Jon Stewart and Bill Maher and Colbert and John Oliver, because there's a point of view, and it's a comedic point of view, and it's a biting point of view. And so I created a talk show based on a late night television format. So it's an online talk show, late night, based on human behavior. So it's all about sex, dating, drugs, relationships, politics, why we do what we do, celebrity behavior, pop culture, anything related to human behavior. And we have a lot of fun with it. It's comedic, but yet it's informational at the same time.
So Dr. Reef, last question for you, because I want people to end on this note. Because I hear whenever I ask someone, hey, how are you? Oh, I'm good. I'm fine. I'm hanging in there. And I'm like, ugh, that almost sounds like what you just said. Oh, I don't have diabetes, so, I'm good. Like, it could be worse. That's another one. So instead of that response, how can we cultivate because it's one of the most common questions that we're asked. How can we practice being vulnerable in that answer? Maybe we can role play it real quick, and I can say, Dr. Reef, how are you?
My natural response would be to say I'm good, but it depends. It depends on where you are in your life at that moment. Sometimes I am good. And so I am good is not necessarily a way to blow somebody off. It's to say, you know what, I'm doing pretty good. And if that's authentic, then that's good.
That sounded authentic.
I think it depends on who you're talking to. I can say for me, I trust you because I feel like we're speaking the same language and that our goals are very similar. And we want to build a better life for other people and help them with that and build a better life for ourselves. And I think that's a great thing. And so I could share that with you and I could be honest with you. I think for some people out there, I don't necessarily think they share the same vision. And if I trust somebody, I'm much more likely to say, you know what, I had a pretty rough day. And either I'd love to talk to you about it, or either I think I just want to be alone, or I think I want to go to the gym and work it off, or I think, whatever it is. But I think with other people, I would be like, I'm okay. I'm all right. And then I would just walk away because I didn't want to talk about it with them because I didn't feel like it was safe. So on one side of it, I think it is important to be vulnerable, but I think it's with the right people at the right time. And I don't think you just want to spill your guts to somebody who doesn't want to hear it. And I think you don't want to spill your guts to somebody who isn't somebody that is close enough to you to do anything about it. We all know somebody who's like that, where you're like, how you doing? And you wish you never asked them a question. Because 20 minutes later, you're banging your head against a brick wall because you can't stand it anymore. So
well, then that's your own fault because you're not setting your own boundaries and walking away, right?
Yeah. Well, you didn't. You obviously didn't read that person very well. So it's a specific situation.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that there's an element to it too. If you don't really know them or trust them that well, then maybe you can even fake it till you make it, because, the work of Amy Cuddy and talking about posture and fake it till you make it, and just standing up a little taller and saying, you know what, I'm pretty good. And saying it with enthusiasm. And maybe you're not really good, but maybe you just convince yourself to just make a turn right there. So I love it. I love the answer. I love the play. Thank you for showing up raw and vulnerable and sharing with us. I think there was a lot of major takeaways there. So heart to happiness. Reef, you made a huge dent here. Thanks, my man.
Thank you.